A reading from the book of Luke, chapter 22. The festival of unleavened bread, which is called Passover, was approaching. The chief priests and the legal experts were looking for a way to kill Jesus because they were afraid of the people. Then Satan entered Judas, called Iscariot, who was one of the 12. He went out and discussed with the chief priests and the officers of the temple guard how he could hand Jesus over to them. They were delighted and arranged payment for him. He agreed and began looking for an opportunity to hand Jesus over to them, a time when the crowds would be absent. The day of unleavened bread arrived when the Passover had to be sacrificed. When the time came, Jesus took his place at the table, and the apostles joined him. Jesus left and made his way to the Mount of Olives, as was his custom, and the disciples followed him. While Jesus was still speaking, a crowd appeared, and the one called Judas, one of the 12, was leading them. He approached Jesus to kiss him. Jesus said to him, "Judas, would you betray the human one with a kiss?"
A kiss. Of all things, a kiss. He didn't say, "That's him." He didn't describe him, the guy in the robe-looking thing, the beard, the one that everybody over in the New World thinks is white. Marsha always tells me I push the line. But with a kiss, of all things, what could have been, what should have been, what always had been, an expression of love, devotion, compassion. A kiss. My niece just had a baby. I probably should have mentioned it during Joys and Concerns, but literally, like yesterday morning, she had a baby. He has a very interesting name, Lachlan, spelled L-O-C-H-L-A-N. What a name. Now, I'm pretty sure that when my niece Courtney and her husband John were picking out names for the baby, I can almost guarantee you that they didn't give the first wisp of thought to the name Judas. The name Judas is like Benedict Arnold. It does not conjure up thoughts of fond goodness and kindness. When I was growing up in church, we were always challenged to work our way, to pray our way, and to believe our way closer to God. The idea was and is that the closer you get to God, the more you'll reflect God and you'll embody godly attributes. Now, remember that Judas was one of the original 12. He was just about as close to Jesus as you could possibly get. He saw Jesus at times and in situations and in moments that no one else did. Not everyone got to be around Jesus when he let his hair down, but Judas did. Not everyone saw the vulnerable Jesus, but Judas did. One of my favorite writers is a woman named Nadia Bolz-Weber. Some of you are familiar with her. She pastors a church in Denver called A House for All Sinners and Saints. We could probably call this one the same thing. Nadia is a truth teller, and sometimes she does it very, very much in your face. She and her church made the decision a few years ago to make a really big deal out of All Saints Day. Now, we honor All Saints Day here at BUCC, but they made a decision to really be bold about it. They go all out. They decorate tables in the church to make places for memories and for those who've recently passed along and transitioned. They make tables and memorials for people that are connected to some of their church folks, and then some people who have no connection whatsoever, but they're very highly revered. Some tables are more like altars or spiritual memorials with artifacts, maybe a piece of clothing or another item that belonged to one of the saints. Other tables maybe just have a card on them with a name. It's just a simple reminder that that person is not forgotten. Nadia talks about one All Saints' Day that her church observed where the saints who were revered left her with a few questions. The Pillar of Fire Church is another church in Denver. It's an odd-looking, large church building that sits just across the street from the Colorado State Capitol building. I've seen this building. In the courtyard of the church stands a memorial of sorts to the founder of the church, a lady named Alma White. Sister White was a trailblazer of sorts. She founded Pillar of Fire Church on her own in 1901. Nadia tells the story of discovering this church and the woman church pioneer and thought to herself how awesome it was to find another woman who was a lot like her, starting her own church work in progressive Denver. She'd found a hero that she could look up to and admire. She was excited to learn more about this woman and her motivation, a woman who was known for godly compassion and service to others in the city. Then, Nadia discovered the truth. The woman who started the Pillar of Fire Church ministered to the hungry, the searching, the wandering, the worrying, the woman who could have been a role model for other up-and-coming female church pioneers, the woman for whom she wanted to share the female church pioneering journey with, was a racist, a bigot, an anti-Semite, pretty hostile toward the immigrant population. Nadia's hero was actually no hero at all. I remember when I was a kid, I dreamed of being a gospel singer. My heroes were gospel singers. Then I became a gospel singer. Then I got to know all of those people that I'd admired and held up as heroes. We became co-laborers and friends. And as I got to know them better, I gradually realized that not all of them, none of them really, lived up to the status of a hero. They were as faulty and incomplete and moody and prone to weakness as I was. I don't doubt their relationship with God. I know that they, like me, are on the long haul journey. And sometimes the more we get to know one another, the more we find that out about one another. So when Nadia discovered her fallen hero, she called a church friend of hers, a lady named Sarah, who was the person responsible for organizing all of the saints' tables for the upcoming All Saints' Day service. She told Sarah of her regrettable discovery and how her hopes were just dashed. She's a racist. She's a bigot. She doesn't even like the Jews, Nadia said. Sarah's response? Send me her name again. I'll add her to the litany of saints, along with all of the other broken people of God. A person like that, a saint? People like that don't belong on a table full of saints. People like that belong on a table full of the reviled. Racists can't be saints. And neither can betrayers. Betrayers like Judas. I can't begin to imagine the battle that had to be going on in Judas's mind. Here was this guy who walked hip to hip with Jesus. If it was possible to see an ulterior motive in God's Son, Judas would have seen it. Judas was as close to God's Son as you could get. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. Sometimes I don't want to get closer to God. If you ever had the slightest inclination to think Kenny could be a hero of sorts, I hope that just dashed it. Because there are times that I do not want to be closer to God. Getting closer to God means you have to make changes. And sometimes they're changes that I don't necessarily want. Getting closer to God means that you have to rearrange priorities and that you have to prefer others to yourself. Getting closer to God means that I have to realize my own selfishness and greed. Getting closer to God means that I've been confronted by the mercy of the gospel. Getting closer to God means that I can't hate my enemies. Getting closer to God means that I'm unable to judge the sin of somebody else because my own sin is obvious and in the way. Getting closer to God means that I have to consider more where and what I spend my money on. Getting closer to God means that I can't help but bear witness to the suffering of others. Getting closer to God means that I forgive others and I tell them so. Getting closer to God means that I mourn with my hurting brothers and sisters, and I grieve over injustice and hunger and homelessness, and stand up for the abused and tend to the neglected, and wrap my arms around some of the most difficult people in the world to love. Getting closer to God means admitting that our plans fall so short of God's original plans for us. That's some of the reasons that sometimes I don't want to get closer to God. It's easier to walk at a distance. It's more comfortable to distance myself and try not to care. Sometimes I just don't want to get closer to God. I don't want to forgive others. I don't want to be kind. I don't want to prefer somebody else above myself, especially those smelly, dirty, needy people. I want to be judgmental. I want my enemies to suffer. I want to be snarky and selfish, and I want to spend my money on me. I want to be number one. I want to be the center of attention, and I want people to get out of my way. And I want God to understand that. So, with people like me wearing things like this, no wonder people struggle with whether or not they can trust Jesus. There's a big, long list of saints who've done everything right, at least as far as we know. We have a habit, it seems, of defying or deifying by ignoring the unsaint-like qualities of our hero saints. When we see them in granite and we see them in stone and we see them in art, we always see a halo, and we always remember the grand and wonderful things they did. But when Nadia tells the story of that All Saints' Day, when she walked past all the memorials and smiled at seeing the names of people like St. Francis and Mother Teresa and Cesar Chavez, and then she sees Alma White, she wondered how she might feel if she truly knew the inside scoop on all the others. The thing we remember most about Judas is the last thing we heard about him. We don't look back with fondness on the days that he walked with Jesus and picked him up when he stumbled, or ushered a broken human to Jesus' presence. We don't recall all of those moments when Judas truly lived up to the legacy of a saint. The last thing we remember is the last thing we heard, his failure. When we picture him now, we imagine a broken man full of regret and sorrow and anger and torment. A man who would love more than anything in the world to be able to turn back time and do everything entirely different. But, wouldn't we all? God remind us that we cannot and shall not be defined by our worst mistake, but by the genuine love we carry in our hearts for you. We're so far, so far from being that saint by the standard of the world. But draw us close to you even when we push and kick and scream and cry and say no. Woo us and draw us, and allow this word to permeate our hearts. Amen.